chat, and later we have some time for discussion at the end, okay?
Sure.
You can go ahead, Victor.
Okay. Can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Yes. So the name of this paper is Gendered Resource Course Booms, a labor market analysis of Andean Peru, and written by me and my co-author, José Carlos Orihuela from Pontificia Universidad Católica del Perú. So a little bit of this paper. So the objective is understand or shed light on the question if the extractive industries as a curse or as a blessing for women. So there is two contrasting empirical evidence for this question. So for example, we have papers like Michael Ross, who argues that in Middle East, oil is an impediment for gender equality. But there is a negative trend or negative findings for these questions. And there is also another empirical evidence, for example, Kotsadam and Tolonen in Africa. So they find that that mining activities can be a blessing for women, but a mixed blessing because benefits women, but the benefit is not as perhaps the benefit for men is bigger. So who was it right? We have like contrasting outcomes in this type of analysis. So local effects debate becomes more complex once that gender is brought into the analysis. We know that in many countries and many mining activities, the positive demand shock that the mines generates usually is male biased, right? Mines contract or hires more men than women. So this may be an important point. So the research question of this paper is how different are impacts in Andean rural regions. So this is like some literature about why impacts can be different. So we have that microeconomics impacts may depend on the intersectoral multipliers, the quality of the linkages that the mine have. It's not the same that the mines generates spillovers or linkages with manufacturing or with just unskilled services. That's kind of the quality of the linkage. Also, gender structures may condition these sectoral multipliers, right? There are some gender relation structures, for example, that only men can work on the mine. That's kind of that was one of the motivations of this empirical paper in the Andes. Kind of when a woman is on the mine, it was like a bad signal that thinking about some I would say traditional visions of the mining activities that people in the highlands have. So that's another point to take into consideration. So the goal is to estimate these effects of mining activities on local populations, specifically rural populations on highlands of Peru. This is the Andes region. And the idea is to estimate or explode the international variation of prices as and also the production as an exogenous variation for a difference in difference model. One important comment is that we are also including a non-market sector, which has not traditionally studying this in this type of articles. And I meant, when I say non-market sector, I meant the housework sector. So it's kind of the persons or men or women who are in charge of the household activities, kind of taking care of the children or the elderly, or go to the market and make purchases, and also cooking or cleaning the house. So that those are activities, kind of if we think about Becker, Gary Becker, like a non-market sector for production or a production of the household. So I'm taking also these persons, we technically are not workers because they don't receive a salary or wage, but they have an opportunity cost. And the data that we use is the national censuses. We have 3 waves: 1993, before the super cycle of prices, 2007, at the middle of the cycle, and 2017, like at the end. And also we complement this analysis with household surveys to see wages, because the census that do not include wage. So this is kind of the motivation, or kind of the structure of the mining production. So you see 1993, which is our baseline period. It seems that production is not as high, but between 1993 and 2007, there is an increase that continued until 2017. And the same for international prices. I mean, international prices begin to explode in 2002, I think. And the increase before of 2002 is basically part of the first generation reform that President Fujimori begin to enact or privatization, of some mines in Peru. So we have Yanacocha, which started production in 1994. Cerro Verde also started production in 1994. So there were many openings of mines after 1993, between 1994 and 1996, I think. So this is like the spatial distribution of the districts. I'm considering not only districts with mine, but also districts around 20 kilometers around of a mine, because districts are very small. We based this on the discussion of Kotzalan and Tolonen, because if you have a mine in a district that is very small, you cannot treat as a control another one that is very close and also small, because the dynamics are perhaps beyond boundaries of districts. So I think I have only 10 minutes left. So background is just there is evidence for Peru of positive impacts of mining. Aragon and Ruth finds effects on household income, not in wages, household income as an aggregate. Hicks and Escobar also find poverty reduction, more public goods provision in mining zones. And Loaiza and Regolini, they find that dynamics affect positively or negatively poverty, right? More mining activity is correlated with a reduction in poverty. And all of 3 are like, they use different specifications. So, okay, I think I can go ahead with this. Just this is a very brief graphical visualization of how Peru is, or how mining Andes are structured. Kind of, this is the share of women in sector. So you can see that in the mining sector, the share of women is very low. It's perhaps 5 or 6% of the 100 of the total. So basically, that mining and construction sector are more dominated by male. But in the housework sector, which is the non-market sector, we have the opposite, right? We have like the almost 85 or at least 80% of these workers are female. And Other sectors as unskilled services or manufacturing, they are gender balanced. And we also see an increase actually of female from 1993 to 2007. And this is the share of sector in total, perhaps to give an idea of how is the sectoral division in Andes. So many of the population is employed in agriculture. This is the share of workers. I should have clarified that. Share of workers of the total, right? It's not like production or GDP. So this is many people rely on agriculture. It's a very agricultural region. But we also see presence of skilled services and unskilled services here. So that's kind of the background. I already described the empirical strategy. Formally, we have these two models. The first one is a difference in different specification for the district's data set. Remember, we have 3 censuses. So mining is an indicator of the mining of being a mining district. Not the opening, because there were mines before 1993, but perhaps the activity of the production was not high as you saw as high as after, as you saw on the figures 1 and 2. And boom is it's a binary variable that is 1 after 1990. Sorry, is 1 from 2007 and 2017, and this is the interaction term, right? This is a standard diff and diff model, and we also follow a wage specification to complement these dynamics of labor by taking the individual in the district D and time T. And we use the same definition of the mining district, but we interact for the logarithms of production to try to isolate or to estimate better the impact of the production increase. This is a strategy that Aragon and Ruth implement in their Yanacocha paper of 2013. As dependent variables for the census model, we have the number of workers and the female share within a sector, kind of to see the dynamics between relocation of female labor and male labor, and also wages for the household service. We just for wages and also well, labor income from principal or secondary activities, and also total income, which includes transfers, which include activities like housing or your agricultural production when you sell that. So it's kind of a total income, not only labor income. And I'll go quickly with the results. And this is kind of I forgot to mention. Yes, 5 minutes. Yes, almost there. So we have a census at 1981 to see, like, to try to test or to draw the parallel trends assumption. So we will see this very often, like after 93, once that the mining expansion begins or is increased, we see like positive effects for men and negative effects for female. But between 2007 and 2017, the second period, both will benefit. That's kind of the main findings of this paper. And in order to, I think that I can show this graphically. So we find that the coefficient is positive for men in the overall workers. So we have like men benefit more from this boom. And inside the mining sector, a higher effect for men. That was kind of obvious because the structure is dominated by men, increases in population, and also it seems to be a decreasing unemployment rate for men. So we see now the gender gaps on the employment generation. Regarding to sectors, we find that the sectors that are linked to the mining are the unskilled and construction. Right, so we see that there is an increase for male employment in these unskilled services, which is transportation, restaurants, hotels, these activities that are not kind of skilled, that like you have to go to college to work here, opposed to skilled services, and construction, which is very related to mining, especially because many of the mining transfers that the government of Peru does to these local governments has to be spent on construction or infrastructure. So digging on income, we do not find a positive effect on the overall sample, but when we restrict the sample to unskilled services, which is the sector that is more linked to the mining, we seem to be a dynamic. It's not also like strictly different from zero, but dynamics are not as clear when we talk about income or wages. Sorry, wages, not total income. So we explore mechanism like if the household income may like that's kind of a proxy of gender relations. The role of the care economy, having children may prevent women to go to work according to this Becker framework, and also human capital. And what we find is that when we analyze or have as a dependent variable total income, we see a more robust increase for male than women. This is kind of the Aragon and Root finding, that just like a confirmation of this. But if we disaggregate by gender, male are the ones that receive more income, not only in terms of labor. This is we split the sample in single, married, and separated, and we see that single and separated women are the ones who are more likely to go to the labor market, and married are not. So that's also perhaps a constraint for them. Instead of when we see the men, all of them are likely to go to the labor market. Kids and the care economy seems not to have a strong effect, because women, even those who have children, can go to work. So perhaps more our gender, the role of the gender roles between married and women rather than kids. And this is similar findings, but for construction and women houseworks, or women who are married are the ones that go to the housework sector, let's say. And this is like, we find no effects of age or education. I think that's kind of it's not driving this difference. So that's kind of the highlights of the paper. We have mixed. We have positive effects for women, but perhaps different dynamics rather than in men. Findings suggest that aging level choices perhaps may shape the positive effects of mining activities in employment and income, and mining activities create spillover with construction and skilled services, not with manufacturing, skilled services, or agriculture, which is very bad for a region like the mining, like the Andes, which technically they will remain with no industrialization. So just for the discussion, this paper highlights the necessity or to understand this as a multiple equilibria, right? We will have, when we analyze local effects of mining, we have multiple equilibria depending on backward linkages, on the quality of these linkages, on gender relationships inside the society, right? And this paper is kind of contributes to this type of analysis. And I think that I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you, Victor. Now we have Natalia Uribe that will continue with the topic on mining in Colombia and Peru, if I'm not wrong. Just as a reminder, you can type in your questions in the chat, and at the end we will have a small discussion. Natalia, you can go ahead.
Thank you, Natalie. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Natalia Uribe. I'm going to present you a paper I did in collaboration with Jim Sanchez from the University of Fairfield and Lorenzo Pellegrini from International Institute of Social Studies. Our research focused on assessing the impact of the Fairmine certification on the well-being of small-scale miners. The evidence that we collect for our research is from Colombia and Peru. Let's start with a brief context and introduction of our study. First and all, it's important that you are aware that in the last 2 decades, there has been an increase in international concerns regarding the company sourcing practice. I mean, that they are aware how the living condition of the producers. And on the other hand, there is an emphasis in the companies, how they guarantee traceable, environmental, and social responsible practices in their operation and with their suppliers. In parallel, we have seen that there is an increasing awareness from consumers. Why? Because they want to know the origin of the products that they are buying, and they have an increasing interest to know if these, how the products are extracted or produced are in a way that is responsible. One solution to tackle these needs, or both needs, are with the adoption of what we call a voluntary sustainability certification. And many of you don't know what is that. What is a voluntary sustainability certification? These are a set of requirements that are created by no-state and multi-stakeholders groups to promote sustainability conduct in a specific sector, like fishery, agriculture, and mining. Just to give you like an idea, okay, how many certifications, for instance, in the mineral supply chain, we find there are 19 schemes, and punctually in the industry that I study, that is the gold industry, we find 11. And if we go deeper of the sector, we find there are 2 for the gold, artisanal, and small-scale miners. But these schemes are Fairtrade and Fairmine. Our interest is in Fairmine, and we focus on this one because it's the pioneer initiative that exists in the artisanal and small-scale mining sector, and it's at the same time is the largest initiative because until last year, it has certified 24 companies, small companies in Colombia, in Peru, in Bolivia, and Mongolia. On the other hand, Fairtrade has certified only 13 operations in other countries as Peru, Kenya, and Uganda. And in general, for the ones that are not aware about the sustainability certifications, all of these, they try to solve or make better the conditions of the certified producers or individuals. Let's move. What is the problem? The problem that we try to focus in the research, we started considering that exists a proliferation of certification. And if we have certification, we also have several impacts studies of these certifications. We found researchers who have evaluated the impact of the certification of well-being of producers. They have been done in other commodities, such as cocoa, coffee, cotton, tea, and so on. These authors estimate the effects of this kind of certification for these commodities on different issues: labor, social, environment, living condition, community, and so on. However, we found that at least between all these authors, there is not a consensus regarding if the certification schemes produce a good or no effect on the producer. And on the other hand, and quite important, is that we didn't find any author who evaluates the impact of sustainability certification on the well-being of artisanal and small-scale miners using punctually a quantitative approach. Then we move to our contribution. The contribution of this study is as twofold. First, very quickly, is to assessing the impact of the Fairmine certification contributes to the current debates in development and sustainable minerals and so on. For instance, we've seen that governments and international organizations have evidence to understand how these schemes provide a possible impacts on the well-being on the miners, because usually these schemes also promote formalization and access to formal markets. And for the industry and consumers, they will have information when they choose certifications, certified products over non-certified products. And secondly, we also found that this study contributes in the field of sustainable minerals, because we didn't find that what we say is an starting point to also use quantitative approaches to measure the impact, especially for a quite vulnerable sector that is the artisanal and small scale miners. Now, I want to present like the literature where we were support the research. Here in this graphic, it is in the area of the gold supply chain, on the gold supply sector, where you find at the production side large operation, that we call it large scale mining, LSM, and we also find artisanal and small scale mining operations. And what is artisanal and small scale mining? This sector is usually formal or informal operation with predominantly simplifying forms of extraction and process. The miners usually use labor-intensive technology because it's made by individuals, family units, or small enterprises in rural communities. On the other hand, in the literature, this one about sourcing, sourcing challenges in the production and in the sourcing practices, we find that there are several kind of solutions for solving these problems and these challenges, and there are more regulation, more economic incentives, consumer awareness, and also voluntary certification, which we focus in one of those for artisanal mining, that is Fairmine. And finally, in the literature, in the available quantitative methods to apply impact evaluation, we find difference, synthetic control method, discontinuous regression, and average treatment, or the treatment using propensity score margin, which is the one we use for this study. Therefore, just to sum up, our research intends to fill up the gap of assessing the well-being of the artisanal and small-scale mining in the gold sector, in the certification label that is Fairmine, using average treatment of the treatment using propensity score match. In the methodology, to pursue our goal, we follow basically 4 steps. First and all, we collect primary data using phone surveys to miners in Colombia and in Peru. We build an index to measure well-being. We build a treatment and control group using propensity score matching, and we estimate the average treatment of the treated effect. With respect to the data collection, we collect 321 surveys, as I say, in the 2 countries, from certified and non-certified organizations. This process was, the surveys were applied by independent enumerators during July and September 2020, last year. We designed the surveys with 50 questions. These questions were adjusted according to the characteristics of the countries, and were divided also in 4 sections. The first ones were socio-demographic and health attributes, household characteristics, labor conditions, and subjective well-being. We gathered 208 certified miners surveys, and in Colombia, Peru, and 113 from non-certified organizations from the same countries. Here is the list of the organization, the years that they have been certified, and the departments and the type of organizations that we collect the survey. And to measure the well-being, we look for an index. One first thing we found is that we decide to build an index since there is not a well-being index for the population we are studying. For that reason, we take into consideration the literature for well-being. We analyze broadly well-being indices available in the literature and known in the field as well. And in particular, we decide to use the framework of the OECD Better Life Index. Using this framework, we create the index. This index has 27 indicators distributed in 6 well-being dimensions, as you see in the screen. And each indicator has sub-indicators. And you can also see in this table. And the index goes beyond 0 to 1, being 1 the highest possible value. After organizing the data, we made some descriptive statistics. For instance, out of the 321 miners, we found there were 127 partners that are like the associates, like the owners of the mining organizations, and 193 workers. Respecting about gender, there were 273 men and 47 women. And we also create a dichotomous variable 0 and 1, 0 for no certified and 1 for certified, when we found that the mean of the well-being is 0.64 for certified and 0.61 for the non-certified miners. The difference in the well-being is modest, but it's still statistically significant. In terms of other demographic characteristics, just to say that for certified and non-certified, the age of the miners that we surveyed were between 33 and 42 years old. And concerning the level of education, all report like they complete the high school, and the certified miners report like higher satisfaction of life. You can see here in terms of health, life, and income, and the other variables were there. After that, we compare the mean of the index in this empirical density. When you find that CPCs per mine, 0 are not certified and 1 are certified. And then we depict also the empirical density well-being index between workers. The one up and the graph down is the partners. We found an interesting finding here, that there was a small difference in the average of the index for the partners of the owners of the cooperatives and associations, but it was a higher difference between the workers that were certified, that belongs to a certified or to a non-certified organization. So since we don't find like a considerable difference in the partners, we decided to continue. Do you hear me?
5 minutes.
Okay, yes, perfect. We decide to focus our analysis only on the workers. At first approach, we estimate we run an estimation of the effect of the Fairmine certification of the well-being of the miners, and we run a linear regression. In this one, we found that according to the results belonging to a certified organization, is significant and increase the miners' well-being, here you see, in 4 percentage points. To check for robustness, we include other variables that are also relevant in the literature of well-being, and we found that the results were consistent after controlling the other variables, and the result were that around the well-being was around 4.5 percentage points higher in the certified workers. Then we decide to, however, personal, it's necessary to consider that we have to take into account that our sample might not be random. Hence, the estimate effect might be biased. by self-selection program. For that, to reduce this bias, what we did, it was to use propensity score match. And this one consists of finding two individuals that share same characteristics except for having or not they received the treatment. In our case, we use it for the reason that I present in the script, but basically that we have no randomized and cross-sectional data, and it allows us also to build a valid control group and eliminates or at least reduce the bias. To compute it, we start by denoting tau 1 equal 1, the individual that received the treatment, that is the certification, and tau equal 0, the individual that didn't receive it. We compute the propensity score of each individual that we denote SI as the probability of being certified given some specific characteristics, denoted by XI. We estimate this score was easily estimate using logic and probability models, and then we estimate the propensity score for each of the individuals in our sample. We find their match using one of the matching algorithms, the nearest neighbor. Once we have the match pair, that is pairs of individuals with some characteristics but not for the treatment. We compute average treatment of the treatment effects, and basically the mean difference of the index between the minors who are certified with the control group after controlling for the other characteristics. After doing all of this, we run again the regression. Now that we covered that wasn't not affected by selection bias, and the effects were consistent, it was positive too, and it was statistically significant at 4 percentage points. And so the results indicate that the effect is about the same as the one estimated with the simple linear regression. Now to conclude, we find that the Fairmind certification has a positive effect on the worker well-being, and it is statistically significant. We found that the miners working on a Fairmind certified mining organization are on average 4 percentage points better off than the ones who are not part of this kind of certification. And we observe different improvements that apply in the satisfaction of health, life, and income. On the other hand, that this study also, we found that fills a gap in the literature by providing the first estimates of the impact of certification in the whole sector. So we also found that was an important contribution, and there are also like questions that remains open. For instance, the gold mining operations have impact that go beyond what the miners can do. Additionally, moreover, there are like impacts of the certified operation in the mining sector that could explain taking other variety of control groups. And one important point is that the data collection was during the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. So the robustness of the results should be tested at larger scale with data collected in situ at different point in time and complemented with a qualitative studies. And that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Natalia. Perfect timing. We switch now to Eric Katovic, and pardon the pronunciation there. We move from mining to drilling. Just as a reminder, you can type in some questions in the chat or stay around at the end for some discussion. Eric, you can go ahead whenever you want.
Okay, can everyone see my screen? Great. Well, thank you so much for everyone for your attention. My name is Eric Katovic. I'm a PhD candidate at University of Wisconsin-Madison. I'm going to be presenting today research about giant oil discoveries and their effects on local governance. So to begin, we can see in this map that giant oil and gas discoveries are a widespread, relatively common phenomenon around the world. The red dots here on the map indicate discoveries that have occurred since 1988. And so we can see that this is a widespread phenomenon, and also discoveries have can often have dramatic economic effects on the countries and regions that experience them. An important thing to understand about resource discoveries, and I'm going to talk, principally here about oil and gas, but this applies in some senses to mineral discoveries as well, is that they're often followed by significant periods of delay and often outright disappointment, in the sense that they never end up producing at all. So we can see here, this graph is showing recent discoveries in African countries, and it's plotting forecast years to production on the x-axis with actual years to when production began on the y-axis. And we can see nearly all of these discoveries lie above the 45-degree line, suggesting that it took much longer than expected for them to produce, and many of these have never produced. So this significant sort of uncertainty, in the sense that discoveries are often delayed or disappointed, creates really large challenges for governance after these events. So we all probably understand that associated with resource extraction and the management of resource revenues, there are a number of development challenges that are associated with this stuff. Associated with the resource curse, including things like corruption and rent-seeking, conflict, Dutch disease and deindustrialization, and exposure to volatility and resource dependence. More recently, however, there's been a literature that has highlighted additional problems that are associated, so either even before resource revenues begin to arrive, sort of independent of resource extraction or revenues, problems can emerge simply created by the anticipation and the disappointment that can occur after discovery announcements. And the problems that have been associated with this phenomenon include things like unsustainable spending and debt, weapons purchases, corruption, and rent seeking. A limitation faced by this literature, it's focused almost entirely on countries in Africa, and has largely deals with treatment that occurs at the country level, right? A large discovery that sort of treats a whole country. And this makes it difficult to establish causality, and also to examine really detailed governance outcomes, which could be difficult to find comparable outcomes across countries. I'm going to contribute to this literature on the pre-source curse by exploiting quasi-experimental variation at the subnational level in Brazil. So taking this to a new context, which has meaningful institutional differences, and also taking advantage of rich data resources available in Brazil to measure panel data outcomes on a number of measures of governance, including things like public finances, public goods provision, and electoral outcomes. I'm also going to make a methodological contribution by quantifying heterogeneity in discovery realizations. And so what I mean by that is basically decomposing effects after discovery announcements into different types of places. And so I'm going to talk in this presentation about places that are satisfied, in the sense that they end up receiving windfalls after discovery announcements, and places that are disappointed, in the sense that they get a discovery announcement, but it never pays off. So it never really ends up producing. And satisfied places are places that are often studied in the resource literature, right? They're the places that are actually receiving resource revenues. And these places, could deal with problems that we associate with the resource curse. A less studied group are these group of disappointed places. They might often be included alongside controls, because they might not receive any resource revenues. Nonetheless, I'm going to show in the presentation here that these places can suffer or experience significant effects. Despite not receiving revenues, they can experience significant effects after discovery announcements. So I'm going to outline my specific research questions in the Brazilian context and preview my results. The first major question, and this is informed by the previous literature, which has looked in African countries, discoveries are often followed by policy changes immediately following them, sort of in anticipation of future revenue windfalls. Governments may increase spending or hiring or debt. I find, however, that this is not the case in Brazil. So municipalities do not react immediately after discovery announcements, possibly because they're constrained by a fiscal responsibility law, which makes it difficult to engage in deficit spending or to take on debt. However, we do see political or electoral effects following discovery announcements. Electoral competition increases, and the average schooling levels of both candidates and winning politicians decreases. I next ask how often municipalities' discovery expectations are sort of realized, disappointed, or satisfied. So how widespread is this phenomenon in which discoveries are announced and then never end up paying off? I find that disappointment is widespread. So there's 48 municipalities in Brazil that experienced large offshore discovery announcements between 2000 and 2017, and only 18 of them end up by 2017 receiving even half of the revenues that they could have expected in a forecasting model, which I'm going to explain. So we see here that disappointment or failure to receive windfalls after a discovery was widespread in this context. So what happened to the places that never got the long-term payoffs from discoveries? I find that in these disappointed places, experience significant negative long-term outcomes. So 10 years on from the discovery announcement, they have significant declines in revenues, public investment, and public goods spending, and real public goods provision. And if I have time, I can discuss a few of the mechanisms that might underlie that. How about the places that actually get oil? So there are 18 of these municipalities that experience discovery announcements and end up receiving large revenue windfalls. In these places, I find that they enjoy significant increases in per capita revenues, spending, yet they don't exhibit increases in spending on economic diversification, nor do they improve real public goods provision or quality. So to set the scene a little bit for the context, Brazil experienced a wave of major offshore oil and gas discoveries between 2000 and 2017 associated with the pre-salt layer, which is a ultra deep water region beneath a large layer of salt. And we can see that the discoveries were clustered after 2007 and corresponded in time, with the exception of a large drop following the global financial crisis, corresponded in time with a sustained period of high world oil and gas prices. So this combination of major discoveries and a period of high prices combined to increase the expected value, the expected future value of these finds. And we can see that this became a very salient discussion topic in Brazilian media and politics at that time. So this is showing the number of news stories in a major Brazilian newspaper, corresponds really closely with these discovery announcements. So we can interpret this to meaning that these were salient events at the time that may feasibly have influenced municipal level expectations. So I'm going to go through a number of steps now for how I set up my analysis. The first step is to collect an original data set of 179 offshore discovery announcements. So there's a number of ways that you could define discoveries. Brazil's National Oil Agency maintains a registry of every time that hydrocarbons are detected in a well, but there's thousands of these and they aren't very salient necessarily. So I opt for an alternative measure, which is offshore multinational oil companies chose to make a corporate announcement to Brazil's Securities and Exchange Commission called CVM, announcing that they have made a significant offshore discovery. And so I collect 179, an exhaustive list of 179 of these announcements filed with Brazil's Securities and Exchange Commission during this period. I'm also able to corroborate nearly all of those announcements with contemporaneous news coverage, again suggesting that these are salient for local population. Because these discovery announcements reference the well at which the discovery is made, I'm able to georeference them and map them here, and we can see that discoveries that occurred over this period were spatially clustered in Brazil's southeastern region, but there is also geographical variation along the Brazilian coastline. The next step is to link these offshore discoveries to affected municipalities. And to do this, I'm going to leverage a unique institutional feature of the Brazilian context, which are geodesic projections of coastal boundaries out to the maritime limit, which determine or create offshore catchment zones for coastal municipalities. So effectively, coastal boundaries for each municipality are projected outwards. And then if offshore production occurs within the catchment zone that's created by these projections, a portion of that revenue is sent directly back to that aligned coastal municipality. So I reconstruct both these orthogonal and parallel projections of municipal boundaries. And then these are I'm able to overlay over top of those a complete registry of geolocated wells in Brazil over this period. And because I know which of these wells was associated with the discovery announcement, I'm able to assign that well back to the confronting municipality. So the final step in this process is for each of these municipalities that has been treated by a discovery announcement is to create a forecast for them of what they could expect to receive in terms of future revenues based on the information available at the time of the discovery. And to do that, I'm going to use just the most basic offshore production curve, which looks like this graph here. So we can see that after a discovery announcement, there's an appraisal period and then a ramping up to full production as offshore platforms are moved, drills wells are drilled, etc. So we can see that there's a delay and then a ramping up to full production. So my first step is to forecast for each municipality after discovery announcement an expected production stream based on this curve that I'm showing here, as well as the volume of the announced discovery and the average production delay in that municipality's neighborhood or sedimentary basin up to that time. I next applied Brazil's royalty distribution rules to transform this expected production stream into an expected revenue stream for each municipality. And then I compute a normalized measure of forecast error, which is pretty simple. It's just the realized growth in royalties since the discovery announcement over the expected growth in royalties over that same period. And so if this measure is equal to 1, it means that there's no forecast error and the municipality ended up receiving exactly the royalties it could have expected. If this number is below 1, it's receiving less royalties than it could have expected based on the information in that original announcement. So if I compute this for each municipality, we can see that there's significant heterogeneity in these discovery realizations. So these top 3 are examples of municipalities that I end up calling disappointed in my sample, in the sense that they are expected, as the model predicts, that production would ramp up after the red line, which is the discovery announcement. Yet actual realized royalties either decline or never change over the subsequent years. Whereas these bottom 3 are examples of municipalities that fit my model. And so they're satisfied by their discoveries in the sense that after the discovery announcement, there's a delay period and then production ramps up as they could have expected. So for my main analysis, I'm going to explore the source of heterogeneity. I'm going to divide my sample into places that were disappointed and satisfied by their discoveries. So if we plot these along the Brazilian coastline, this is just a sample of Brazil's southeastern region, we can see the fundamental idiosyncrasy or heterogeneity that's inherent to offshore discoveries. And so I argue in more detail in the paper that these discoveries are exogenous to municipal conditions. They're determined by multinational oil companies. They're serviced by a few distinct ports and have very little to do with these aligned coastal municipalities besides the royalty transfers. So these are effectively exogenous events, and I test that empirically by estimating conditional random assignment tests, where I show that baseline municipal characteristics cannot predict which municipalities get drilling, discoveries, or what type of discovery realization they have, nor can political alignment between municipal mayors and state or federal government leaders. That also does not predict outcomes here. So I argue that these are exogenous to municipal conditions. Finally, to examine outcomes, I bring together sort of a number of panel, municipality level panel data sets from Brazil, including indicators on public finances, private sector for federal and state transfers to the municipal level, as well as real measures of public goods provision and outcomes.
5 more minutes.
Thank you. Okay, so my empirical strategy is relatively straightforward. It's just an event study specification, and I leverage 2 control groups. The first are municipalities that received wells but never got discovery announcements. And this is based on previous literature, which argues that conditional on getting exploratory activity, getting a discovery is as if random. If that is not a convincing specification, I also, as a robustness check, I construct a pre-matched control group, but using coarse and exact matching. And finally, I use 2 estimators, a standard 2-way fixed effects estimator that controls for municipal and time fixed effects. And I also implement the Callaway and Santana staggered event study estimator to deal with concerns that come from a context in which you have staggered treatment timing and heterogeneous treatment effects. Turning to the results, we can see here first on different measures of municipal revenue. We can see, if we look first at oil revenues here, that as sort of defined, the disappointed group never receives revenue windfalls after discovery, and oil revenues increase significantly, ramping up along with this delay period. They ramp up in satisfied municipalities, eventually 10 years after the event, resulting in a 5,400% increase. And so that's an increase from 2% of baseline average income for the year to 109% of average income 10 years on. So we can see the radical effects that these discoveries can have in places where they actually pay off. And of course, these massive revenue windfalls are reflected in terms of total revenues, but we also see this finding here that we're actually observing significant negative outcomes in the disappointed group 10 years on. If we turn to spending, we answered that first research question, which is, did municipalities react immediately in anticipation of future windfalls? And the answer is no. Perhaps they were constrained by this fiscal responsibility law. So we can see, however, that we see this long divergence over time. As discoveries are realized, satisfied municipalities enjoy large windfalls and are able to spend more, while disappointed municipalities are suffering negative long-term budget cuts. Okay, turning to some important determinants of municipal development, we can see that public investment falls significantly in these disappointed places, up to 57% decline 10 years on. So that's a fall from 101 reals per capita in the baseline period to about 43 reals 10 years on. So a significant decline in municipal investment. We can also see, and these results are noisy here on the right, but satisfied municipalities, despite increasing spending in nearly all other categories, fail to increase spending on economic diversification. So that's spending on industry, agriculture, or services. Whereas disappointed municipalities, we see that these effects are trending upward, suggesting that places that are realizing that they're not receiving oil windfalls may start spending more to promote other sectors of their economy. Finally, turning to other important measures of development, which is public goods provision. It's a really important role of municipal governments in Brazil. We can see that as the discoveries pay off in satisfied municipalities, we again see an increase in public goods spending and a decrease in public goods spending in disappointed municipalities. However, in both types, we see that following discovery announcements, real measures of public goods provision fall. And there's a number of potential reasons behind this, including the fact that they might be overwhelmed by large revenue windfalls, or there could be leakage into corruption and a number of other factors. Finally, we can see here that satisfied municipalities, like I said at the beginning, these major offshore discoveries are major economic events that significantly increase GDP in affected places. And the one on the right is just to show that my per capita measures are not driven entirely by changes in population. I don't see significant changes in population. I conduct a number of robustness checks. And finally, I explore effects on municipal elections by setting a treatment. This is a difference in different specification that sets treatment equal to 1 if a major discovery announcement occurred in 4 years leading up to election. And I find that discovery announcements provoke, along some measures, increases in political competition. So more people run for office, the number of donations increases, and candidate schooling declines, suggesting that lower education candidates run for office. And also, I don't show that here, but lower education candidates actually win more often as well. So in conclusion, I show that discoveries are often delayed and disappointed. This is, I think, an important and understudied part of the resource curse. In Brazil, disappointment was widespread, and places that had satisfied results or that actually got windfalls struggled to convert those windfalls into improved public goods provision. Disappointed municipalities suffered negative long-term outcomes, and I also find that there was this electoral response in that more people ran for announcements or ran for elections after discovery announcements. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Right on time. So I'm gonna jump in so we can have time for a discussion at the end. Okay. Okay, I'm just gonna time myself. Last paper in this session, this is about resources extraction and high-level education, joint work with Lenin Balsa and Camilo de los Rios, that I think is here, in the case he wants to reply to some questions. So maybe there is no need to say this in this session, but we all know there are many countries around the world that are rich in oil, gas, and minerals. Most of them are developing countries, and more important, a lot of them use this sector as a strategy for development. However, and as Eric and Victor have mentioned, there are a lot of research that shows that sometimes there are bad economic and political outcomes associated with exploiting this sector. These outcomes could be slow economic growth, public corruption, violence, conflict, and political instability. In this paper, we ask whether human capital accumulation can be added to this list of bad outcomes. Why is this important? Because if that's true, then we can claim that natural resources may have severe long-term consequences on economic development and maybe inequality. So our research question is whether a resource boom that could be either a discovery of resources or an increase in the price of the minerals or oil and gas can crowd out post-secondary education. So the related literature is still not conclusive, and I'm going to skip this part for the sake of time. But what is most important here is like to understand why the literature is not conclusive yet. And it's because a positive shock to this sector may generate multiple incentives. So for instance, that may increase the opportunity cost of study, right? There is a booming sector. I don't need to go to school. I better go to work and make a lot of money. Or the sector can create few skilled jobs over time. So in these two cases, this positive resource shock can decrease the incentives to acquire high-level education. On the contrary, this booming sector may increase household budgets. So households may decide now to send their kids to college, or young adults, right, may just decide instead of enrolling right after finishing secondary, enrolling to college, they may just delay this decision. So in this case, a booming sector may create either positive incentives to acquire higher level education or no effects at all. So in this paper, we wonder what is the effect of a positive exogenous shock to the research sector on post-secondary enrollment and completion decisions of high school students. Our setting will be Chile, and our positive research shock will be the 2000s commodities boom, or mostly the copper price boom. And there are a couple of reasons why Chile may be a good setting to evaluate this question. I just want to highlight that the mining industry in this country is mostly large scale and capital intensive. And more important, there is almost no evidence of illegal mining. So when we think about mining workers in Chile, we don't see something like the picture on the left that you may probably and unfortunately see in other developing countries. When we think about young workers in this sector, we see something like the picture on the right, which is great to study high-level education because it minimizes concern about the effect of this sector on compulsory education, okay? So this is our empirical paper. We have a theoretical model in the manuscript, but here I'm just gonna focus on empirical analysis. We run our analysis at the student level, and we will use a set of continuous difference indifference equations. So let me give you a preview of the results. As I said, we analyze enrollment and completion. For enrollment, we find that a positive resource shock increases the likelihood of enrolling into college, but this enrollment is late, right? It occurs 2 years after, or a couple of years more after graduating from high school. So far, this is a good outcome, but then we dig deeper into who are these students, and we find that this positive effect is found only among students that come from charter or what is called voucher private schools in Chile. Instead, we find a drop in the likelihood of post-secondary enrollment among students that come from public schools. And I have to mention here that the type of high school is a very good indicator of socioeconomic status in Chile. So public high schools will be highly correlated with low income status. For completion, we find that a positive research shock increases the likelihood of dropping out from college. And again, we see that this effect is found mostly on students that went to a public high school. We examine some mechanisms. We find that lower returns to higher education makes be explaining the results, and also fewer inputs available to public compulsory education, together with a potential decrease in the quality of public education during these schools. So I'm going to jump straight to the data. We use copper prices from 2004 to 2018. This will give us variation in time, as Victor was saying. This is exogenous if you're familiar with the mining sector in Peru and Chile. Even though they are important countries in the supply of copper, we know that prices in this sector are mostly driven by demand, aka China. So we have that for measures of extraction that will give us the spatial variation. We ideally will want to have here a measure of sort of resource endowment throughout the country, something like oil reserves in the US. Unfortunately, we don't have that data for Chile, which is surprising. So we took the following approach. We're going to use the georeference mining cadastre that has all the extraction concessions that have been given in the country since 1983. We are going to aggregate these measures at the labor market level to sort of capture the entire extent of the shock to the labor market. And in order to assure exogeneity of this variable, we are going to calculate pre-treatment averages of these variables. We're going to create two variables out of these data set. I should have mentioned that. So these two variables will be pre-treatment averages. And those are the ones that you see in the equations here. The first one is the pre-treatment average percentage of the local area leased in each labor market. And the second one will be similar, will be the average number of mineral concessions per square kilometer in each labor market. Let me just quickly tell that pre-treatment will be the years between 83 and 2003. And then you can see here by the dotted line that we will end up capturing the boom in copper prices, and the bars here indicate the number of concessions that are open over time, which you can see sort of a lag that shows that there is also some action in the number of mining activity there. So that's on resources. Then we have to merge this data with data on education. And to that, we're going to use the universe of all high school students that graduated from a secondary institution in Chile from 2004 until 2018. Once we identify all the students, we are going to merge this set using a unique identifier with the universe of students that enrolled in a post-secondary education in Chile. This could be a college or could be a technical institute, anything considered post-secondary that requires a high school degree. And when doing that, we are going to identify those students that enroll immediately after graduating from high school, and those that enroll, but enroll a little later, either 2 years later or up to 6 years. And we have a reason to do that. We can discuss it later. Once we enroll, once we match these students to the set of enrolled students, we also match this set to all the universe of students that finish a post-secondary degree in Chile. So as an empirical strategy, as I mentioned before, we will run a set of continuous different specifications, nothing new here. And the idea behind the formulation of these equations will be evaluate the effect of a positive resource shock, right? So here you see the example of our equation that measures the effect on the probability of enrollment. Our outcome variable here, y, takes 3 values. It could take the value of 2. If the student finishes high schools and enroll right away into a post-secondary institution, it will take the value of 1 if it enrolls, but enrolls 2 years later or a little more, and 0 otherwise. And this will be a function of our structure measure that again is at the label market level, the interaction term, and we have time fixed effects. So there is no need to include price here as alone, I mean. Then we have a rich set of controls here in the vector X. We have information such as the age of the student, gender, GPA in high school, attendance rate, a lot of variables that we use as predictors of quality or socioeconomic status of the student. What I'm going to show you in the results will be mostly the results on the coefficient of interest. That will be the estimate of beta 2. We take a similar approach to, instead of looking at this 210 outcome, we will look at the number of years that it takes a student to enroll into a post-secondary education. So here the outcome variable will be the log of the number of years between college and high school. And we express this in a very similar way than the previous equation. The only difference here is this delta capital variable, capital delta, that measures the self-selection into enrollment. Similarly, we estimate the probability of completion. Here in equation 3, our outcome variable will be just binary. 1 as if I finish my college degree, or 0 if I don't finish. And similarly, with enrollment, we also modify this variable and estimate the effect of a positive research shock on the number of years it takes me to graduate from college. So here I'm showing you the results on post-secondary enrollment using this multi-category variable 2, 1, and 0. We estimate this with a multinomial logic. And here I'm measuring extraction as the percentage of local area least. Each column represents a stronger specification. I just want you to focus on the blue area that gives you the marginal effect of a positive research shock on either immediate enrollment or late enrollment using no enrollment as the base category, okay? So here you can see that a positive research shock increases the probability of enrollment into post-secondary education, but this is late enrollment, okay? When we modify this variable, sort of to verify what we found before, and use instead the number of years it takes me to enroll, we observe a consistent effect. So here we have in panel A, extraction measure as a percentage of local area least. And you see that the interaction term is also positive and significant. That means that a positive research shock increases the years that takes high school graduates to enroll into a post-secondary education. When we measure extraction as the number of mining leases, we find a similar effect. We also explore this by type of institution and by the type of degree. We observe that this late enrollment seems to be benefiting this college, like students that delay their enrollment, they are more likely to go to institutions that are associated with more quality. That means those institutions that offer a 4-year degree program instead of a 2-year degree program, that it would be more like a technical degree. So when we look at completion, here we see the opposite. So even though it seems a positive effect, what we found before, right? Like it seems that a positive research shock increases enrollment, even though it's late, it is a positive effect at the end. Here is the opposite. We find that a positive research shock increases the likelihood of dropping out from college, okay? And this is consistent regardless of the measure of how we measure resource extraction. I have 5 minutes left. I have to say here that even though the results are statistically significant, I'm going to be straightforward about these. These are very small, okay? So the change in the likelihood of completing a degree is very small. So Then we ask, okay, who are these students? And pardon here because this analysis is sort of fresh, but I'm able to provide you some insights, right? So who are these students that are delaying their enrollment, and who are these students that are likely to drop out from college? So here, what we do is we have information, as I mentioned before, on the type of high school that the student attended to. So this variable could be either a private school, a public school, and what I call a charter, but I should have called a voucher school, that is an hybrid between the two. Let me remind you also that the type of school that you attended to during high school in Chile is highly correlated with your socioeconomic status. So when you read public school, it's highly likely that this person is a low-income student versus a private and charter school is more likely to be middle/upper class student. So what we do here is to run the same equations, but now including this variable interacted in a triple differences in differences. And I'm going to show you the effect of the triple interaction. So here you see when we use percentage of local area least as a measure of extraction, the base category is non-enrollment. And look at what we found here, that it's an effect that was masked in the previous results. We do find a reduction in the likelihood of enrollment into post-secondary education that comes from students that attended to public high schools. However, this positive effect that we found before in late enrollment, it's mostly driven by students that went to voucher/charter schools, as I said before, more middle upper class students. The majority of students in Chile, high school students, attend to these type of schools, and that's why overall the net effect is positive. When we look at completion, we also find sort of a consistent result. We find that the increase in the likelihood of dropping out from college seems to be coming mostly from students that come from public high schools. This effect is weak, is statistically significant at the 10%. We still believe there is something there. I have 2 minutes. Let me just jump into the mechanism that we explore. We analyze whether this is a story of low returns to high education. We do find evidence that a positive resource shock increases the return to all levels of education, but this increase is the lowest among tertiary education. We also find evidence that a positive resource shock decreases the resources that the central government sent to all municipalities to be used in education. And let me show you quickly this. So this is Mineduc, that is will be the Ministry of Education. We find that a positive resource shock decreases the amount of resources that local governments receive from the central government during this positive resource shock. This is consistent with the fact that Chile is characterized as a developing country that has counter-cyclical policies. However, this may also be an indication that this is harming some students that attend to public high schools. And we also find an evidence of a decrease in the quality of public education. What we do here is to analyze the student to teacher ratio in public high schools. And we do find an increase in this ratio with what may be an indication of an increase in household income. Maybe households are now sending more kids to school. Therefore, there are more crowded rooms in public schools, which may affect in some sense the quality of education. So there are still other mechanisms that we need to test. But so far we have a story already here. So to finish here very quickly, answering to the question, what is the effect of a positive resource shock on human capital accumulation? We do find strong evidence that natural resources may affect human capital accumulation in resource-rich places. Why? Because we find an increase in the likelihood of post-secondary enrollment. However, this is only among middle upper class students. There is a decrease in the likelihood of enrollment of low-income students. There is also strong evidence of an increase in the likelihood of dropping out from college among low-income students. And I'll stop here for the sake of time. Thank you. Was I okay on time?
Perfect.
Okay, we can open the discussion here, and I'm seeing that there are some comments in the chat. So I don't know if somebody wants to ask a question directly here, they can unmute. I see that Steven has questions.
I already asked the questions in the chat.
Thank you, Steven. I'll read it later. I'll just, okay, I can read here. So Camilo is asking a question for Natalia. He said that maybe he missed it, but if you can briefly explain a little bit more about how you selected and contact the minors in your survey.
Okay, yes. As I say, we select certified and non-certified minors in the organizations in Colombia and Peru. Initially, we planned to make in-person surveys, but the study was during last year, so we have to move and change the strategy to phone surveys. For the Fairmind certified organizations, we contact the Fairmind initiative. This one provided the emails and the telephones of the representative of the organization. So with them, we collect the phone numbers and WhatsApp numbers of the workers and partners. And for the non-certified organization, what we try to do is to identify formal organization in the same regions or municipality or provinces where there were the certified ones. In that way, they have like similar characteristics. And we also reach their contacts through like local NGOs. That's why as we did.
Thank you, Natalia. And also Stephen here is asking if certification comes with substantial administration cost, and if it's, for instance, easier for large scale operators to do it, or if you can tell us more about like what's the process and if it's easier for some type of miners than others.
And the Fairmind certification is only for artisanal and small scale mining organizations that are established, are legal, or are defined under the rules of the country. So that implies that the organization for getting the certification has to be at least in a formal structure. So it's for organizations, and it's not for individuals to get the certification. And implied costs and efforts, definitely, because it needs like human resources for implementing health and safety system, for processing as well, mercury and other processing methods. So it implies costs, and it is for the Fairmind certification accepts like the formal and the different kind of organizational settings that are allowed depending on the country. So it's interesting what Steven say, that maybe to analyze regarding the different sides that even exist in the sector, because there are some cooperatives, or there are associations, or there are small businesses, but at some point all of them share that are artisanal and small scale mining operations.
Thank you, Natalia. And I'm gonna follow out here. I was missing some information about eventually the market effects of these certifications, sort of to understand what is the mechanism, why these miners may experience an increasing well-being. Like, is it that because they're artisanal and small, and here I'm just thinking about how the industry operates in Chile, a certified miner is more likely to sell their products later on to a central unit, or because I'm assuming as artisanal and small scale miners don't have access to foreign buyers, right? Or I don't know how that works.
That is dependent of the countries. For example, in Colombia, Peru, I know that Ecuador and Chile is different. Colombia and Peru, at least the miners have the possibility to export directly the gold or to find a local gold trader that make this connection with international market. The main incentives that we found that the miners get the certification is because that gives and improve the well-being first and all, because there are organizations that are promoting good practice, well, like good salaries, because at least they have formal salary, because overall the artisanal and small scale sector is quite informal. So under a certification such as Fairmine, is required that this organization first and all has to comply with the regulations, second, provide equipment, health and safety equipment, protect the environment. So for those elements, is an improvement on well-being of the workers that are doing the activity. On the other hand, this certification provides economic incentives. Fair price, usually in the formal mining sector, the prices are quite low in comparison with the ones that are in the formal market. So the organization receive better prices that at some point may translate to better well-being to the miner, but it doesn't work exactly what we say, just to understand well-being in different dimensions. And on the other hand, this certification offer like extra bonus, they call it premium. The idea that they invested in the improvements of the organization, like an hour, because they are doing a responsible business. And that's why the international market that I mentioned in the context are willing to pay, that the gold that they are buying is not financing conflicts, is respecting human rights, and is also not polluting the environment.
Thank you. I also have more other questions, but maybe we can go around and then we can come back. So Stephen is also asking to Eric here, wondering if the negative effect in disappointed municipalities is driven by areas that are close or neighbors to lucky areas, a relocation of labor, capital investment away from the disappointed area towards the lucky areas. Enough variation to see if the effect is more negative if your neighbor was successful. And I don't know if you want to jump in, Eric.
Sure. Yeah. So I argue, I guess, in the paper that sort of some of the outcomes I'm looking at, there's not a huge capacity for spillovers. For example, local public goods provision is pretty much constrained to within that municipality. But there are some things that we think, I think could be specifically prone to spillovers. One of them would be construction activity. So the royalties are often spent on, infrastructure and things like that. And so presumably firms or workers could move to a booming place seeking out that construction activity. And I see that in the data. So when I look at private sector formal employment, I see that there's significant declines in construction employment and number of construction firms in these disappointed places over time. So that's suggesting there could be this sort of reallocation mechanism. The other thing, which is responding to your second question as well, so how do these places update their discoveries? So the question is, in the comment from Stephen is, after a discovery announcement, there's of course more information coming in, right? And people are going to be constantly updating their discovery expectations based on this information. And so something I find in an analysis I didn't show in the presentation is that, so at the time of an election, if expectations are disappointed, that incumbent politicians are re-elected less often. And so this, I guess, from looking at the data, it's very rare that there's a big revision downwards. That's like a formal announcement. And so effectively voters, they might expect that this revenue windfall is coming. They heard the announcement in the news. Local politicians might have made promises about it. There's very rarely an official revision downwards. And so if they're not observing the revenues coming in, they seem to punish those incumbent politicians, assuming that they might have stolen that money or done something irresponsible with it. And so there's also this political effect that places that are disappointed, they're like trying to figure out where their money is. there's not usually official guidance from any of these corporate announcements explaining where the money went, and that therefore seems to lead to lower re-election rates. And there's literature showing that increased political turnover also results in sort of worsened public goods delivery.
So I have a follow-up question on that, Eric. Also thinking about turnover there, and also because you run your analysis over like sort of 10 years or something like that. And I should know this, but majors change, right? I'm assuming 4 years here. So how do you control for that? Because I'm assuming, let's say an incumbent starts, projecting, oh, there is a discovery, we will have this windfall. There is not such a windfall. He gets punished. Maybe he's out of office. So what is the reaction of the next politician that comes to replace it? And how do you control for that? And because to me, it seems that you're assuming that the expenditure function of the municipality will stay the same over these 10 years, or the objective function, I guess I should say.
That's a really good question, right? So this period of ramp up to full production takes, we see about 10 years, 5 to 12 years in most of the municipalities. So over that course in time, of course, at the maximum, a mayor could serve 8 years in office consecutively. So if a mayor is in office at the time of the discovery announcement, or they're probably making pronouncements about things that are going to happen quite a ways down the road. And so, yeah, I agree that I don't know if I specifically deal with that. It's something that I should think about more. I guess I'm looking at, so and that's part of the specification, I'm looking at this difference approach, where the treatment is just, did a discovery occur in the last 4 years? One thing I should note is that it's a context where for my event studies, I'm looking at treatment being the first discovery announcement, but in many of these municipalities, that's followed by subsequent additional discovery announcements, which could affect in the forecasting model, that's accounted for, but in this expectations of the political election sense, anytime there's a discovery in the last 4 years, I'm saying that it was treated, and therefore that subsequent election might be affected by that discovery announcement.
Okay, and well, I have more questions, so I don't know if somebody else wants to ask another question, and I'll reserve mine for later. Nobody? Okay, so I see that Stephen has another question there for me. I also have questions for Victor and Eric. So let me just continue with Eric here. And I have 2 questions here. One is related, like, maybe I didn't understand it quite in your presentation, but these are only explorations carried out by Petrobras, or you also have private actors here. And then I'm asking this because I wonder if municipalities anticipate, right? Oh, they hear about a discovery, and do they get to anticipate? Oh, it's likely that they will make another discovery next to my area. And also, what is the channel of information? Like how? Like these discoveries are published in the SEC, you said, right? Like how likely is that local politician will learn that discovery took place?
Yeah, thank you. So first of all, most of the discoveries are made by Petrobras, because like 90% of oil production is done by Petrobras, but there are also discoveries made by a number of other, like a total of 9 companies in total. So there's a few at the tail that are making just a few discoveries. An interesting case is OGX, which was very active during the pre-salt era, was a large company run by Ike Batista, and made large dramatic discovery announcements, and then ended up declaring bankruptcy and never developed any of those fields. So some of the disappointment comes from that. And so that was something at the time, municipalities had no real reason to think that that company would not deliver outcomes relative to other companies. So that, is something that, looking back, people might weight Petrobras announcements versus other company announcements differently, but at the time there was no really reason to know that. And for this question of how did they find out this information, that's sort of specifically why I go with this definition of discovery announcements, is because for nearly every one of these corporate announcements, I'm able to find so usually the next day, there's a news story written in the newspaper about that discovery announcement. So that's, I guess the argument is that there's almost always news coverage of these events.
Thank you. I'm going to ask my question to Victor, and then if I have time, I will answer Stephen, but I took note already. Victor, and no, great work. I'm just wondering about commuting in Peru. And again, I'm relating this to Chile. There are a lot of workers that travel. You know, these companies are huge. So they even pay plane tickets to fly them from one city to the other just for the shift, right? So the question is, does that happen in Peru? And then if so, you may have spillover effects in markets that don't have mining, right? So if men that are flying over to other city to work in the mining industry are no longer available in that market, right? What will be the effect for female labor?
Yes, thank you, Natalie, for that question. Actually, there is a lot of migration, especially for qualified workers. So while this project previously had like a qualitative phase where we sent some people to interview to understand how was the dynamics of the hiring process of the firms, and basically most of the qualified work as engineering, as perhaps accounting, come from the capital city, from Lima. So and basically 90% of the unskilled work is hired in that population. So that happens a lot. That's something that we try to correct, like only restricting the sample to persons who live or in that province, not exactly in that district, because there is a lot of commuting between districts, but certainly it's a problem. And I think that that's perhaps why the backward linkage are not working or are bad quality linkages with the local communities, because only unskilled services that perhaps has a different spillover than manufacturing or skilled services are present there in the mine. So commuting it's perhaps one of the key aspects on how these dynamics occur.
Thank you. And I'm going to use the commuting issue to reply to Stephen here. Yes, I agree. I think we can try a different specification in which we may look, for instance, at the distance between high schools and mines. We will have to switch from an individual specification to a college level or high school level specification, for instance. And in your question, are we assigning Roman effects to local mining only? Yes. And I'm gonna use the commuting thing to argue that we still need to work on that. Why? Because of the long distance commuting, it may be that a booming mining sector affects students' decisions in areas that don't necessarily have mining. And we have to think more about that, but that's a good point. And the commuting thing is so crucial, or is so complicated to deal with. And I know Victor is agreeing with that, but thank you. I think we have to leave. I don't know if there are I think we have to leave for Joshua and Grace. Thank you so much to all of you. Thank you, Stephen, for the questions.
Nice presentations. Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you, Stephen, and thank you, everyone.
everyone.
This was great connecting with
Thanks,
everyone,
Eric.
and thanks for the
Yeah,
feedback.
I agree. Thank you. Bye. Good luck.
Bye. Take care.
Take care.